Chaos erupted in a federal courtroom as a judge lost patience and wielded the ultimate authority, revoking Trump's bail on the spot. In that instant, wealth, power, and political status meant absolutely nothing. What followed stunned everyone, instantly flipping the courtroom's power dynamic and sending shockwaves across the nation. Fewer than 1% of criminal defendants ever have their bail revoked purely for courtroom behavior. Even fewer are billionaires. Almost none are former presidents. Consider this. What could possibly happen that would push a judge to slam the gavel, raise their voice, and strip someone of their freedom instantly? This wasn't a delay or a warning. It was the nuclear option. The tension in the room became electric in seconds as a defendant laughed, smirked where silence was expected, evidence was read, and lines were crossed until the judge snapped past all restraint. In that moment, decades of wealth, influence, and legal protection counted for nothing. The bail deal was dead. The courtroom fell silent. The power dynamic had flipped completely. But the bigger question, and the reason you need to watch until the end, is this. Was it pure anger? Or was it the justice system finally drawing a line that had never been crossed? What unfolded in that room didn't just affect one man. It sent a chilling message. No fortune, no title, and no past power can put anyone above the law. It served as a warning across the system because so many assume bail is just a payment. Write a check, walk free, and wait for trial. That belief, as this moment proved, is dangerously wrong. Bail is not a favor or a receipt. It's a contract, a legal agreement between the defendant and the court, where the court temporarily gives you your freedom, and in return you agree to strict conditions. Show up, follow orders, and above all, respect the authority of the court. The moment that respect disappears, the deal can end instantly. Most people don't realize this. Bail can be revoked even if no new crime has been committed. You don't have to flee. You don't have to harm anyone. You don't have to break the law outside the courtroom. All it takes is behavior that signals you cannot or will not follow the rules. Mocking the court, laughing during evidence, interrupting proceedings. These aren't minor slip-ups. To a judge, they're red flags, screaming that the defendant thinks they're above the law. And when that belief is displayed openly, judges are trained to shut it down immediately. This is why the situation escalated so sharply. From the judge's perspective, it wasn't about emotion. It was about control, authority, and preserving the credibility of the justice system. Every future defendant, juror, and lawyer is watching because one unchecked act of disrespect can collapse the perception of fairness for everyone. So when bail was revoked, it wasn't impulsive, it was procedural. The judge wasn't punishing arrogance. He was enforcing a contract. Freedom comes with conditions. Those conditions were violated. Once that line is crossed, the law acts swiftly. A courtroom isn't a debate stage, a campaign rally, or a television set. It's one of the few places in society where absolute authority still exists. When a judge speaks, that voice carries the full force of the law, not opinion, politics, or popularity. That authority must be preserved because courts don't run on power or money. They run on perception. Jurors must believe the judge is in control. Lawyers must trust the rules will be enforced evenly. Defendants must believe consequences are real. The moment a judge tolerates open mockery, laughter, or disruption, that perception evaporates, and the courtroom becomes theater, eroding trust in the entire system. This is why enforcement happens quickly and publicly, especially when the defendant is powerful. Allowing spectacle signals weakness and invites chaos. Before you go, drop a comment with one word, fair or too far. We read every single one, and your voice shapes what we cover next. If you value deep, no-nonsense breakdowns like this, hit subscribe. It's one click that keeps this channel alive. And if this made you think, hit like so more people can see it. Your support matters more than you realize. Once that line is crossed, justice itself stops being possible, which is why judges respond so forcefully when their authority is challenged, especially in high-profile cases. This wasn't about ego or thin skin. It was about preventing a dangerous precedent from taking hold. If a powerful defendant is allowed to openly disrespect the court without consequence, every future defendant will try the same. The law becomes optional, order turns to chaos, and the system begins to collapse from within. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Ordinary people never get this level of patience. If a typical citizen laughed during evidence, whispered while a judge spoke, or mocked proceedings, They'd be in handcuffs within seconds. Powerful figures pushed boundaries because they're used to rooms bending around them, but this courtroom didn't bend. When the judge raised his voice, it wasn't personal, it was institutional. He was drawing a line not just for one defendant, but for the integrity of the entire legal system. Respect the court or lose your freedom. That is the rule. In that moment, enforcement took priority over tolerance. Let's be honest about what most people feel but rarely hear said out loud. Wealth changes how the justice system treats you. Money buys top lawyers, delays, and far more patience. For ordinary people, one misstep can mean immediate consequences. For the powerful, misbehavior is often excused as misunderstanding or strategy. That double standard is real and well demented. That's why this moment shocked everyone. The invisible shield finally failed. And when it did, it sent a clear message. Even power has limits. What happened in that courtroom was a rare moment when money, status, and political power simply stopped working. The judge didn't see a billionaire or a former president. He saw a defendant violating the rules. And once the behavior crossed a clear line, wealth became irrelevant. That's why the moment felt so explosive, because we're used to watching powerful figures push boundaries without consequences, slowly creating the assumption that the rules are flexible if you're important enough. Courts don't survive on flexibility, they survive on consistency, and when inconsistency becomes too obvious, judges are forced to intervene or they risk undermining the legitimacy of the entire system. That's what made this moment so different. The court wasn't reacting to a single outburst. It was responding to a pattern, a growing sense that normal standards didn't apply. When that belief is displayed openly in court, it becomes dangerous. The moment the public perceives two sets of rules, one for the wealthy and one for everyone else, trust disappears. The bail revocation wasn't merely punishment, it was a reset, a clear public signal that privilege has limits. And when those limits are crossed, the consequences are sudden, visible, and absolute. What seemed like a spontaneous explosion was actually the culmination of pressure building over months, possibly years within the system. Judges don't casually wake up one morning and revoke bail in a high-profile case. They are careful, risk-averse, and acutely aware that every decision will be scrutinized, appealed, and politicized. For it to reach this point, something had to go very wrong. Powerful defendants often test boundaries gradually, starting with subtle side comments, smirks, or eye rolls before escalating into public challenges to prosecutors, clerks, or witnesses. Eventually, they move into gray areas like skirting court orders or turning proceedings into media spectacles. Each step is deliberate, testing how much the system will tolerate. For a long time, the system absorbs this behavior because courts are wary of appearing biased. Judges know that every warning or sanction can be spun as political persecution, so they hesitate, offering patience they would never extend to an ordinary defendant. That patience, however, sends a dangerous signal. Keep pushing until strategy turns into open contempt. That's the breaking point. Once disrespect becomes visible to everyone, jurors, court staff, and the public, the judge faces only two options: enforce authority or lose it completely. This is what made the moment inevitable. It wasn't about one laugh or a single comment. It was a pattern that finally became impossible to ignore. The system bent again and then hit its absolute limit. When bail was revoked, it wasn't sudden. It was overdue. The line had been tested too many times, and once crossed, there was no turning back. This is where the concept of moral hazard comes in. Simple terms, moral hazard occurs when someone takes increasingly risky actions because they believe they're protected from real consequences. When you think the safety net will always catch you, stop paying attention to where you step. That's exactly what happened here. For years, the message was clear: push the system and nothing happens. Warnings went unheeded, rules were bent, and lines were crossed. Each time, the absence of serious consequences reinforced the belief that none would ever come. That belief becomes dangerous, not just for the court, but for society as a whole. When a defendant feels protected by wealth status or political influence, behavior shifts, respect turns into sarcasm, compliance becomes performance, and the courtroom stops functioning as a place of law and starts feeling like a stage. From a judge's perspective, that's when the risk becomes unacceptable. Moral hazard doesn't stay contained, it spreads. If one powerful person is allowed to openly disrespect the court, others will follow. Lawyers push harder, defendants test further, and rules start to feel optional. Once that happens, the court loses its ability to function. That's why judges are trained to do one thing when moral hazard grows too large: remove the safety net. That is what the bail revocation truly represented. Not rage, but risk management. The judge determined the defendant could no longer be trusted to follow the conditions of freedom. The insurance policy was canceled, the experiment ended, and when moral hazard collapses, the correction is never gentle. It's sudden, public, and designed to send a clear message. Consequences are real. For much of modern history, privilege has acted like a shock absorber. Wealth, fame, and political power soften consequences, turning mistakes into misunderstandings. Violations become negotiations. Time stretches and pressure fades. But here's a truth most people never see. Privilege has a hard floor. Once you hit it, there's nowhere left to fall but straight down. That courtroom is where the floor finally appeared. Inside those walls, net worth stops mattering. Political allies cannot intervene. Influence cannot negotiate. A courtroom is one of the few places in society where the rules are meant to apply equally, and the judge controls that room completely. When a defendant's behavior signals that they still feel untouchable, even in that courtroom, the system reacts decisively. That's what made this moment so striking. The defendant wasn't behaving like someone facing real limits. He acted like someone expecting the room to bend the way every other room had before, but this one didn't. The judge didn't flinch. The moment a court allows privilege to override authority, it stops being a court and becomes a suggestion box. From the judge's perspective, this wasn't about punishment, it was about reasserting reality. The law had to make one thing unmistakably clear: this space is not for performance, leverage, or dominance. It is for compliance. And when privilege refuses to recognize that boundary, the response must be immediate and undeniable. That's why the bail revocation felt so sudden. It couldn't be gradual. Hard floors don't warn you. They stop you the instant privilege runs out of room. The system applied force, not debate. And that's the lesson. Privilege works until it doesn't, and when it fails, instantly. In high-stakes cases like this, lawyers aren't just legal experts, they're risk managers. Their role isn't only to argue the law, but to control the environment, manage their clients' behavior, and prevent exactly this kind of disaster. When bail is at stake, every word, reaction, and expression matters. And when a client ignores that reality, the consequences can be immediate. By the time a judge revokes bail, something has already gone seriously wrong behind the scenes. Lawyers are expected to warn their clients relentlessly. Don't react, don't comment, don't perform. Judges rarely punish lawyers for legal arguments, but they do punish defendants for behavior. When a client pushes anyway, it signals that the attorney has lost control or never had it, which makes the situation extremely dangerous. A defendant acting out in open court tells the judge loud and clear that this person cannot be trusted to follow rules outside the courtroom either. Once a judge believes a defendant won't listen to their own attorneys, court orders start to look meaningless. At that point, bail isn't just a privilege, it's a liability. From the judge's perspective, this wasn't mere misbehavior, it was a breakdown of safeguards. The legal system relies on defense attorneys as a buffer between the court and chaos. When that buffer fails, the system compensates by tightening control fast. That's why bail revocation is often called a last resort. It signals that the court no longer trusts the defendant or the framework surrounding them, and once that trust is gone, freedom disappears. In short, when lawyers lose control, the court takes it back decisively and without hesitation. When people talk about a judge losing control, they often misunderstand what's really happening. This wasn't a system breaking down. It was a system defending itself. Courts are built to absorb pressure, controversy, even provocation. But when that pressure threatens legitimacy, the response is swift and forceful, like an immune system reacting to a serious threat. A courtroom only functions if everyone believes the rules matter. Jurors must trust the process, staff must feel safe and respected, and the public must believe outcomes aren't decided by fame or intimidation. When a defendant openly mocks proceedings, that trust begins to erode. And once legitimacy is in question, the court doesn't just have the right to act, it has a duty to act. That's why the reaction felt so dramatic. It wasn't emotional. The judge wasn't defending his ego. He was defending the authority of the court itself. Allowing the behavior to continue would have sent a dangerous message. Rules are optional for the powerful. No legal system can survive that. Bail revocation in this context is a stabilizing measure. It removes the disruptive element, restores order, and signals to everyone inside the courtroom and beyond that the process still has teeth. Once the system perceives a threat, tolerance disappears. This moment wasn't about anger, it was about survival. The court chose enforcement over collapse. And when institutions feel threatened, they don't negotiate, they assert control. Trust is the invisible glue holding society together. You don't see it, but you feel it every day when you follow the law, sign a contract, or believe a courtroom decision actually matters. Public trust in the justice system has been bleeding for years. Every time powerful people appear to escape consequences, that trust erodes a little more, which is why this moment landed so hard. For once, the outcome didn't match expectations. There were no endless delays, no gentle warnings, no special lanes, just the system enforcing the same rules in real time. For many ordinary people watching, it felt shocking, but also grounding. When people believe the system is rigged, they stop respecting it, cooperating with it, and believing that effort matters. That kind of cynicism is dangerous because it doesn't remain theoretical, it changes behavior. Communities fracture, anger grows, and eventually people stop resolving conflict through institutions and start resolving it through force, chaos, or withdrawal. This moment wasn't just about one defendant, it was a reminder that rules still exist, and trust, once restored, is fragile but essential. This is why the judge's decision mattered far beyond the individual case. It sent a clear signal that conduct still matters even when the defendant is powerful. That signal acts like a pressure release valve. It doesn't fix everything, but it stabilizes the system and reminds people that the law hasn't completely lost its spine. For working-class Americans especially, moments like this are rare but powerful. They challenge the belief that there are always two systems, one for the rich and one for everyone else, even if that belief is often justified. Seeing rules enforced restores a sliver of faith. Trust isn't rebuilt with speeches, it's rebuilt with actions. In that courtroom, the system chose action. This is the moment that quietly terrified people in positions of power, not because of who the defendant was, but because of what the action represented. When bail is revoked for someone at the very top of the political and economic hierarchy, the message ripples far beyond the courtroom. The lesson is simple. Status is no longer a shield. For decades, elites have operated under the unspoken assumption that consequences are negotiable, that lawyers will step in if things go wrong. This moment shattered that assumption, showing that privilege can only protect you so long and that the law will act decisively when limits are crossed. Delays happen. Pressure builds behind closed doors and accountability can feel abstract. But this moment broke all expectations in full public view. It demonstrated that impunity itself can be revoked, and that's what made it so destabilizing for powerful circles. If a former president can be treated like any standard defendant, then no title is sacred. CEOs who ignore subpoenas, politicians who mock ethics investigations, and influential figures who assume rules don't apply to them all saw a warning flare. The asset they rely on most, special treatment, suddenly looked fragile. This isn't dangerous for democracy, it's dangerous for unchecked power. Democracies collapse when laws are optional for the elite and mandatory for everyone else. What happened here pushed back against that imbalance, even if only briefly, reminding everyone that authority flows from institutions, not personalities. Of course, the backlash will be intense. Appeals will be filed, narratives spun, and pressure applied. That's inevitable. But precedents don't disappear once set. They linger and shape future decisions. That is the true impact of this moment.